Well, hey, welcome back to Foundations, week 2. You made it through week 1, and so that's wonderful. Hope your discussion was really profitable and hope this is moving you in the right direction. We looked last week at the very beginning of our vision statement. We pursue, and that whole idea of pursuit, that we would step into what it means to be an apprentice of Jesus. Remember we said apprenticeship is 3 primary actions: being with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, and doing the things that Jesus would do if he were us in the world around us. And so today I want to step into that idea of the transformational love of Jesus. We pursue the transformational love of Jesus. And I want to do that by looking at that center section of what it means to be an apprentice, becoming like Jesus. Because if you're anything like me, that idea of becoming like Jesus means I'm going to need to change. That's not natural for me. My natural inclination is very different than the Jesus I read about in the Gospels, who had a sense of peace and calm about him, who always reacted the appropriate way, who had a level of wisdom and discernment because he was listening to his Father. That's not the way I naturally operate, and it's probably not the way you naturally operate either. All of us have our own reasons why we're separate from, or kind of quirks as why we're separate from the person of Jesus. The Bible just broadly calls that sin, and we are seeking to become like him. And so therefore, a very real question needs to be addressed, which is change possible? And if change indeed is possible, how do we do it? And I don't want to just rush into, well, of course change is possible, because if we look around at our lives and we look around at the world around us, we can see a lot of examples of people not really changing. Like, things might look a little bit different on the outside, but at the core, people often are the same. And the world around us is not really changing. There's lots of brokenness that continues to be broken. So is change even possible? And if it is, how do we do it? That's what I want us to dive into today. And so I want us to go first to 2 Peter chapter 1. We're going to look at a couple different passages as we deal with this question, is change possible? And try to get a sense of what the scriptures tell us. And so we're going to start in 2 Peter chapter 1, and I'm going to start in verse 3. I'm going to read a bit of a longer section for you, but I want you to try to listen to the argument that Peter's making. This is to a scattered and persecuted church that is addressing and engaging the gospel in the midst of a society that's going completely the other direction. Listen to what he says. His divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness, through the knowledge of him who called us to his own glory and excellence, by which he has granted to us his precious and very great promises, so that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped from the corruption that is in the world because of the sinful nature. For this very reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue, virtue with knowledge, knowledge with self-control, self-control with steadfastness, steadfastness with godliness, and godliness with brotherly affection, and brotherly affection with love. For if these qualities are yours and are increasing, they keep you from becoming ineffective or unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, so there's a couple things that Peter says there that I think are really important for us to get a hold of. The first one is this. You already have, if you're a follower of Jesus, you already have everything that you need for life and godliness. We already have it. It's in us. But in addition to already having it, we also need to step into it. So there's this invitation into becoming partakers of the divine nature. That's a fascinating phrase, that we're being invited into the very nature of God himself. Sounds like becoming like Jesus, right? But that process of becoming, it happens through the effort that we make. For this very reason, Peter says, make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue, and virtue with knowledge, etc., etc., etc. Make every effort. There's effort that is required. So we already have everything that we need, but we need to take those raw materials, as it were, and through effort, enter into this change process that will happen progressively. We see that at the very end, if these qualities are yours and are increasing, they keep you from becoming ineffective or unfruitful. So there's a movement that happens because we're making effort. Now, with that in mind, I want to turn back to the book of Galatians. Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, is talking through this idea of change. You may be familiar, at the very end of Galatians chapter 2, there's a famous statement that Paul makes regarding the idea of the life of Christ being lived out through us. He says in verse 20, I am crucified with Christ. I no longer live, but Christ now lives in me. The life that I'm living in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God. So he's the one living through me because he loved me and he gave himself for me. So it's this interesting juxtaposition that Paul's saying that when conversion happens, I'm still living, but I'm kind of living out of death. I'm crucified with Christ, and he's now the one that's living in me. The argument then continues to flow, so let me read for you starting in chapter 3, verse 1. It's coming right out of that argument. Paul says this, O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? It was before your eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified. Let me ask you only this. Did you receive the Spirit by works of the law or by hearing with faith? Are you so foolish? Having begun by the Spirit, are you now being perfected by the flesh? Did you suffer so many things in vain, if indeed it was in vain? So Paul is saying, all change, everything that's happening from conversion all the way onward, is the work of the Spirit. It would be silly for us to think that we're the ones doing it. And yet Peter says, 2 Peter chapter 1, make every effort to step into this change process. And Paul's saying in Galatians 3, it's all the work of the Spirit. It would be foolish for you to think you converted yourself, and it would be just as foolish to think that you're becoming like Jesus through your own effort. So how do we hold those things together? Well, Paul himself is going to help us do that. One more passage in Philippians. Philippians chapter 2, starting in verse 12. Listen to the paradox of what Paul says. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only in my presence, but so much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. So work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, because it's God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. So which one is it? Is it my work that I'm working out my salvation, or is it his work that he's working this thing out within me? Paul seems to be saying both things are true. Yes, you have everything that you need for life and godliness. And yes, all of the work of transformation, it's all the work of the Spirit. And so hold those two things together. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, because he's the one who's doing the work that's in you. So 3 conclusions that I want us to draw from those 3 passages. First, the Bible seems to say that change is indeed possible. We can be different people than we were. We can be different people than we start out in our pursuit of Jesus. Secondly, we already have what we need. We have what we need through the Spirit and through all that we've already been given for life and godliness. The way that God has created us, the image of God that's been placed in us, we already have everything that we need. And the Holy Spirit is doing the work, and we have a role. And those two things can't be separated. Both things have to be true. The problem that I think most people have is not a lack of desire to change, but it's a lack of knowledge as to how to change. So I meet a lot of people who really want to be more like Jesus. They really, deep in their heart, they really want to be more like him. They just don't know how to do it. There's not a pathway that they can see out in front of them where they can become more like him. And there's 2 lies that push on us as we try to wrestle with that idea. The first lie is, I'm not being formed right now, so I have to choose formation. That somehow I'm living in a way that's neutral, and the formation that I'm choosing, that I want to become like Jesus, there's a pathway that I have to step on in order to be able to be more like Jesus. Otherwise, it's just going to remain like it is. So that's the first lie. I'll unpack why that's a lie in just a second. And the second lie is this, that the world around me is both controllable, under my control, and therefore, in most instances, neutral towards my moral development. I'm becoming a fine person. Maybe not more like Jesus, but certainly not less like Jesus. I'm just becoming me. And those are both lies because there's a culture around us that is forming us, whether we want to be formed or not. Let me say it a different way. The question is not whether you will be formed spiritually. The question is whether you will be intentional about the way you're being formed spiritually. I am being formed spiritually by the world around us. If you came to our welcome class, you saw two graphics that you'll see on the screen as well as in your books. And they talk about this idea of intentional and unintentional spiritual formation. I want to take a little bit more time to walk through those because I think they're really central to what it means to engage the transforming love of Jesus. If he's going to transform us through his love, we need to understand the way change works. If change is possible, Paul seems to say it is, then what does it look like for us to step into that? Well, unintentional spiritual formation. We would say there are three kind of easily controllable factors that are part of that unintentional spiritual formation. They're just things that happen in our lives. One of them are the stories that we believe. Just stuff that we believe about the world around us. Things like the whole world is just a cosmic accident. It was created by a bunch of stuff blowing up, and things have just evolved to be like they are. Now look, you can be all across the board in how you understand the origins of the world, but understanding purpose versus no purpose are two very different ways of looking at the world. That's a story that we believe, and it has impact. A story that we believe might be something like, he who dies with the most toys wins. Or that there's a great way for us to become righteous people is through moral acts that we do. These are stories that are in the world around us. And there's all kinds of different stories. Every political party has a story. Every movement that's happening in the world has a story behind it. The stories that we believe form us. In addition to stories, the friends that we have, the people that we encounter, they form us. We get this intuitively. Your mom probably told you when you were a little kid, be careful who your friends are because you're going to become like them. And to some degree, that's true. We are formed by the people around us. And so the people that we're in relationship with are formational to us. But the one that's probably the most invisible to us, I'll simply call our habits, our rhythms. There's certain things that we do, and we do them almost completely without thinking. Things like when you get up in the morning, if you're going to take an inventory, there are probably 10 to 15 things that you do before you head out the door in the morning. And you do them every morning, and you probably don't even think about it. But those things are formational to you. Everything from brushing your teeth and eating breakfast as a formational activity to scrolling through Instagram or checking email. The things that you do first thing in the morning, the things that you do at night, right before you go to bed, those are key formational moments. But all through life, there are habits that we engage, and those habits, they impact us, they form us. And all of that is kind of tied together in what I would just call our environment. The place that we live has an impact on us. So if you were the exact same person, believing the exact same stories with the exact same friends, and you grew up in a rural environment or an urban environment or a suburban environment, if you grew up in the Midwest or you grew up in the East or you grew up in the Pacific Northwest, your life would be different because the environment would push on you in different ways. Now, what's fascinating right now is that all of us are living in two environments. So right now, you're living in or around York, Pennsylvania, but you're also living in the virtual world. Your group of Facebook friends or Instagram friends or the people that you're connected to on whatever your social medias are, those are all part of the environment that you live in. And that environment also shapes us. All of that to say that over time, all of those things, whether we intend for them to or not, they make an impact on us. So what does it look like for us to be intentional about our formation, to make every effort, in Peter's language, to work out our salvation with fear and trembling? Well, we call that intentional spiritual formation. And basically what we do is just substitute those factors with the things that intentionally bring us into the life of Jesus. So this is what I would call our working theory of change. This is how we believe that through the scriptures, through the way that God has revealed himself, through creation, sociology, and psychology, this is the way that we change. One, the stories that we believe is replaced with biblical teaching. Teaching that's grounded in actual timeless truth. We believe that the Bible needs to be interpreted, it needs to be understood, but it actually represents the truth of who God is and how the world is intended to work. And so when we take that teaching and we apply it in a formational way, that teaching starts to shape us. The people that we encounter are replaced in some of the core, most important relationships in our lives with what we would just simply call the community of faith. People who spur us on towards being more like Jesus. People who are walking with us in the journey, and we're walking with them in the journey. And being part of the journey with them shapes us and shapes them. And then replacing habits are practices, the rhythms of the way that Jesus lived, what has been historically called the spiritual disciplines, but are maybe broader than that, and certainly that word discipline tends to have a negative connotation. But what we're talking about here are healthy rhythms. Things like engaging the word and prayer first thing in the morning. Things like having silence and solitude as a regular part of our rhythms. Being connected to a community as a discipline, whether I feel like it or not. Coming to corporate worship, that's a rhythm, a habit, that's part of the way that we engage the beauty of who God is and what it means to follow him. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of them. And together, they make up our life. They make up the rhythms that form us into the people that God's making us to be. And so if we're intentional, we're taking those habits and we're intentionalizing them through practices. And all of that, instead of just the environment that we are passively subjected to, and whether it be in York, Pennsylvania, or on the internet, replacing that is the power of the Holy Spirit. The idea that God is really the one who's doing the change. Let me say it this way. If you have all the best teaching, you have all the best community, you have all the best practices, you're still not, in my understanding of the scriptures, going to be yourself changing more into the image of Jesus. You're positioning yourself well. But Jesus is the one who does the work. And that's that Galatians 3 idea. Are we so foolish as to think that we are saved by the grace of God through the Spirit, but we are perfecting ourselves somehow through our own effort? No, he's the one who's making the change. Now, there's some kind of a percentage out there. I don't know what it is, but some of it requires us. Some of it requires him. It's his work. And while I don't know what the percentages are, I'm going to take a wild guess to say the Holy Spirit's the one doing the heavy lifting in the change process. But it is important for us to, again, in Peter's words, make every effort. That's a part of the process. Here's what I want you to hear. Change is not just about having more information. We will not get more information and therefore change. We need to change at a heart level. Because knowing something is not the same thing as doing something. And doing something isn't even the same thing as wanting to do something. So knowing something and wanting to do something are really, really different things. I talk all the time about the fact that I know with concrete knowledge that eating ice cream at night is really bad for me. I know it is. But I also really like it. And so because I really like it, I can study for hours before 10 o'clock at night. And I can understand all the reasons why it's bad for me. And then I can shut the computer, and I can walk over to the refrigerator, and I can get out the ice cream and eat it right out of the carton. Why? Because I really like it. Because my desires are what change me. They're the things that really impact me. And so that formational process, it's not just about more information, it's about changing our desires. What Jesus says in a very underappreciated teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6, he says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And we tend to think of that because he's teaching it in the context of finances and provision. We tend to think of it as if I just show you my checkbook or my bank account, I guess this is the 21st century, you will be able to tell me what I love and what I care about. But if Jesus intended to say that, what he would have said is, where your heart is, there your treasure will be also. Your treasure will follow your heart. But that's not what he says. That's probably true, but that's not what he says. What he says is, your heart will ultimately follow your treasure. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What's that mean? Well, it means that if I am intentionally putting effort into, weight on, healthy biblical teaching, if I'm engaging at a sacrificial level, even though it's difficult at times, healthy biblical community, if I'm willing to make sacrifices in my personal rhythms so that I'm engaging the truth of who God is and living within the lifestyle and the rhythm of Jesus, I am putting my treasure there, and my heart will ultimately follow it. I will start to find that my loves and my desires are changing. That whole process of change is the way that we start to step into what God has for us. Let me read you a quote from Eugene Peterson in his book, Subversive Spirituality. He says this: "Following Jesus means not following your impulses and appetites and whims and dreams, all of which are sufficiently damaged by sin to make them unreliable guides for getting any place worth going. No is a freedom word." I love that. I don't have to do what either my glands or my culture tell me to do. The judicious, well-placed no frees us from many a blind alley, many a rough detour, frees us from debilitating distractions and seductive sacrilege. The art of saying no sets us free to follow Jesus. Why? Because when I put my effort into the pursuit of Jesus, when I am willing to say no to the stuff of the world, when I'm willing to say no to the rhythms that are forming me, when I admit I am being formed by all of the stuff in the world around me, I then can step into the fullness of what God has. Let me try to close with an illustration that I think is maybe helpful to you. This is a tough thing for us to get because many of us come from a background where any effort is equated with works righteousness. And so it's really difficult for us to get our heads around what's it mean for us to put effort into the process. Imagine a pitcher and a catcher. That pitcher and catcher are interacting like a pitcher and a catcher. The pitcher's throwing the ball, catcher's receiving the ball. That catcher is going to go behind home plate, squat down, and get ready to receive. And the pitcher is going to throw the ball right in. Now, what does the catcher do? Simply receive. The catcher isn't doing anything other than being present in that place. Say the catcher decides that he wants to go back to the dugout for a drink of water. So he leaves, goes back to the dugout. If the pitcher keeps pitching, the balls are still coming in, but there's nobody there to receive them. Because the pitcher is still doing his job, but the catcher isn't there to do his job. In the same way, as followers of Jesus, we are positioning ourselves to receive what Jesus is bringing to us. He's the one doing the work. He's the one who's throwing the ball in. All of the effort is coming from his side. Our effort is simply to be in the right place. If we are wanting to get wet in a refreshing waterfall in the mountains, and the waterfall's over there, it would be silly for us to stand where we are and yell about the fact that we're not getting wet. Or just wait and hope that God is someday going to come and bring the water to us. It's important for us to move, and that's the effort. So it's not work that generates something that we've earned, but rather it's effort that puts us in the position to receive the free gift that God gives to us. Dallas Willard says it this way, that there's a difference between effort and earning. We are to put forth effort, not so that we would earn anything, but so that we would receive what he has for us. When we say that we pursue the transformational love of Jesus, what it means is that we are seeking to position ourselves so that we would be changed by him. And that's the heart of what we're seeking to do at York Alliance, that we would, on Sunday mornings and during community groups through the week, during all of our different gatherings and all of the different structures that we put together, we want to position one another so that we would receive the transforming love of Jesus, that we would change to be more like him. So as you discuss, there's lots of ways to start to evaluate how you're unintentionally being changed and what it looks like to intentionally step into that spiritual formation. I want to encourage you to step into that in the week to come. And as you guys go through these conversations and process all that you've just heard, I want to encourage you to think through not the work that earns you anything, but rather how can you and I be positioned to receive the grace of God that he gives to us. Have a great rest of the week, and I look forward to week 3, back again in a week as we continue on this Foundations journey.